So now we are coming to the last item for today's class, today's lecture, which is on the screen. You can see from the slide the problem of theoretical and experimental analysis of human consciousness, analysis by units, and the problem of the unit of analysis. And I would like to begin this final part of our discussion of this lecture with making one step back I think that we have to have in mind all the time the idea of the evolution of Vygotsky's thoughts and understandings. Because this is very important if you really want to understand the deepness of the book Thinking and Speech. It's always better to read the book with understanding of the general frameworks than without any understanding, in order to find the understanding in the book. And when we speak about Vygotsky's cultural historical theory, there are two main qualitative characteristics, or two main basic ideas, or two main distinguishing features of the theory. The first we have already discussed. The first is the idea of the social origins of mind. And the second we did not discuss yet. But this second feature, this second idea, is also very important, at least not less important than the first one. And this second idea is the idea of sign mediation. Mediation, signs and symbols. In every description of cultural historical theory, you will see that Vygotsky's theory is remarkable by the understanding of the social regions of mind and the role of symbols and signs and tools. Sign mediation is the second one. Let me tell you a little bit more about this sign mediation. According to the definition of higher mental function is, by definition, the mediated function. It includes the mediation by signs and tools. In our life, in everyday life, mediation takes, or the use of signs takes a very important role. I would like to go again back to the example of the car. If you are driving a car, your behavior very much depends on the signs you see on the road. I mean the traffic signs. They are regulators of the behaviors. Otherwise it will be the panic and the chaos on the road. And in our everyday life, we see a lot of examples how important the signs are. One of the examples, which is famous example, I take from Vygotsky's book. I don't know how in other countries, but in Russia, for example, there is an old, very, very, very old traditional habit to make a note for memory. So if I want to remember something, I can use this very old-fashioned style of making a note. I take the handkerchief from the pocket and make a note on the handkerchief like this. And then I put this handkerchief back. And then in the morning, when I put my hand in the pocket, I touch my handkerchief, take it, and see, aha, this is the handkerchief. I made it to remember. And what should I remember? Okay, I had to call to my mom, or there is a birthday of my friend, or something like that. This is the sign. So what I have been done, I just created the sign, the artificial signal, artificial stimuli for me, in order to remember something which I have to do. Of course, this is the individual sign. This is the sign just for me. Nobody else can understand for what I made this sign. this note for memory. Of course, it's very good. For example, if I have a date with the beautiful lady for tomorrow, I made this sign for memory. And if my wife in the morning recognizes this sign, it will be a problem for me. But usually, if my wife takes this handkerchief, says, "Hey, Nikolai, why it's not here?" I say, "Yeah, it's just because, well, I have to make a very important telephone call." Of course, I can use a different sign. I can use a reminder on my phone or my cell phone. But by doing this, I get a risk that anybody else will look and understand what is the reminder about. Of course, I'm joking, but you see that there are signs, individual signs, and there are cultural signs. And the difference between the individual sign and the cultural sign is the cultural signs are understandable in principle, potentially are understandable for everybody. And if you go back to the topics of thinking and speech, if you take the written speech, for example, the written language, if you know the language, it means that you know this system, because every language is a very huge system of signs. If you know the language, it means that you potentially are able to understand all those signs. If you don't know the language, the foreign language, so all the books written in this language are closed for you. They are just nothing. If you understand the language, it means that in principle, potentially, you are able to read every book which is written on this language. Why I speak about this? I speak about this just to show you that the science, the cultural science, are really changing our physiological processes. They are making them wider. For example, our biological memory is very short, is very limited. We have a very small amount of memory from the point of view of biology. We can hardly remember a lot of things. But if you want to remember something, what we do? We have a task to remember something. We go to our memory and take from the memory what we need to remember or what we need to recall. But this is very limited. To remember is not normal. To forget is normal from biological point of view. But if you know the language, if you know English, for example, it means that if you want to remember something, if you want to recall something, you can go to the library, to the collective memory. You can take the book and read from that book what you need. It means that potentially all books which were written in English are part of your cultural memory. And your cultural memory is a billiard times bigger than your physical, your biological memory. And using of science is making our memory human memory. Using of science making our thinking the human thinking. So this is very important aspect of Vygotsky's approach to understanding of higher mental functions. Science are making us humans. We use science and we really enlarge our physical abilities. And they are practically unlimited because of the collective memory, collective thinking, culture, literature, and arts, and so on and so forth. And now we can come to mediation from the perspective of the development of Vygotsky's thought. We are coming back to the main idea I'm trying to explain to you today, that during those years when Vygotsky was preparing this book, he changed his approach to the understanding of the nature of human mind, so that it should be taken into account. So, and I mentioned before the break that Vygotsky made the evolution from understanding, from mechanical understanding of the relations between the higher functions and mental functions to the organismic understanding, from mechanism to organism. And I think that now it's time to come back to this topic. And I hope that my next slide will help. Oh. I'm sorry. So, look here. Making research and the experimental study of mediated operations, so which means that the operations with science. At the beginning, Vygotsky was sure that every mediated operation can, without reminder, to the very end, be decomposed and reduced to natural ones, just like any machine or technical tool can, without reminder, be decomposed into the system of natural forces and processes. So, it means that for Vygotsky, the system, the sign operation system, the new combination of the components is of the special type of is of the special type. It's like a machine, like any technical equipment which can be decomposed into the components without any rest. That was his understanding. That was his approach. And even more, not only mediated operations, but the higher mental functions themselves also could be, according to Vygotsky, reduced into the components without no reminder. If you look on the slide number 18, it looks very similar with the previous one. All higher forms of behavior can always be divided completely and without any reminder into the natural, elementary neuromental processes that make it up just as work of any machine can, in the last analysis, be reduced to a definite system of physiochemical processes. So, that was the theoretical, methodological position that what does it mean to analyze higher mental functions? To analyze higher mental functions is to decompose these higher mental functions into the elementary processes. Like every machine can be decomposed to the parts of the components. That was the approach of Vygotsky in the beginning. But during the experimental studies with the memory, remembering, concept formation, during the experimental research on concept formation, artificial concept formation, Vygotsky gradually changed his approach. Experimental results did bring a lot of evidences that this understanding, this mechanical approach is not valid. that was very interesting to mention how flexible these psychologists, Vygotsky, was in respect to understand the limits of present understanding of the state of affairs. He was searching for the new understanding of things, analyzing a huge amount of experimental materials he and his students obtained during the experimental research. Look, at late 1920s, he was absolutely sure that the analog with the mechanism, with the machine, is really adequate to demonstrate the approach. But in 1 year, in the beginning of 30s, a new understanding went, and Lev Semyonovich began to reject this mechanical understanding. He tried to find a kind of new way. And what is interesting is that in chapter 1 of Thinking and Speech, he starts to discuss the idea of two types of analysis of systems. The first type of analysis of complex systems, he defined it as analysis by elements. And the second type of analysis he defined as an analysis by units. What is the difference? It's very interesting, because if we do not understand the difference between the analysis by elements and analysis by units, we can hardly understand the main ideas of the book Thinking and Speech. That's why he begins the book from the extended discussion of this topic. It means that he shows that the previous idea of analysis of complex developing systems by elements, by components, as machines, is not valid to understand the nature, the structure, and the construction of psychological systems, the mental systems, the higher mental functions, the unity of thinking and speech. Making this, he indirectly criticized his own previous ideas, showing their limits, showing that this type of analysis is not reliable, is not valid. It doesn't fit to the nature of the system, the unity of thinking and speech. And this idea is very deep. Of course, it takes a lot of time to understand. Probably we need a special lecture about the how this idea of two types of systems, mechanical systems and organical systems, how those ideas were presented in the German classical philosophy, for instance, in the works of Hegel. But if we do this, it will move us far away from the topic. But what I want to say is that this idea of two types of system, mechanical system and organical system, has very deep roots in the history of philosophy. And therefore, it's quite difficult to understand if you have no background in philosophy. But what is not difficult to understand is that it was very important for Lev Vygotsky to begin the book, to start the book about thinking and speech by explaining the difference between analysis by elements and analysis by units. To say briefly, for him, this system, the unity of thinking and speech in verbal thinking, is not mechanical unity. It's not just a combination of thinking and speech. It's organical unity. It's a sort of organism which cannot be divided into parts. It should be divided into units. Like our body, our organism. Of course, we cannot divide it into parts. Arms, legs, head. And we can decompose this system into parts. We can cut the head or legs and arms. But this type of system does not consist from parts. It consists from organs. Organism consists from organs. You can cut the head, you can cut the arm, and the arm will be not organ anymore. Arm is organ when it belongs to the organism. And the relations inside the organism between the parts is different from the relations of the components in the machine. You can take your car and decompose into parts, and then you can change the parts and combine the car again. But if you take an axe and cut our body into pieces, you will never then be able to combine them together, because these are systems of different natures. And what is the unit of the organism? The living cell is the unit of the organism. The living cell is the minimal part of the organism, which includes all the characteristics of the whole. And Vygotsky is applying this approach, this organismical approach, to the analysis of the living unit of thinking and speech. And what I want to show is that, again, the quotation from Thinking and Speech, which looks like this. I think it's slide 19, right? In our view, an entirely different form of analysis is fundamental to further development of theories of thinking and speech. This form of analysis relies on the partitioning of the complex whole into units. In contrast to the term element, the term unit designates the product of analysis that possesses all the basic characteristics of the whole. The unit is a vital and irreducible part of the whole. The key to the explanation of the characteristics of water lies not in the investigation of its chemical formula, but in the investigation of its molecule and its molecular movements. In precisely the same sense, the living cell is the real unit of biological analysis, because it preserves the basic characteristics of life and are inherent in the living organism. The problem of the unit of the analysis is one of the ideas which appeared in Vygotsky's theoretical thinking quite late. if you take his writings from 20s, you will never find the idea of the unit of analysis. As I said before, the mechanical approach was dominating. And even now, this idea of the difference between two types of analysis, analysis by elements and analysis by units, is in the focus of discussion of many people who are working in Vygotskyan tradition. And what I would like to say is that there is still a tradition of misunderstanding of the idea of unit of analysis. I'm not going to go into teeny details, but what I want to say is that that was a revolutionary change. This idea of analysis by units really opens the perspective to understand the organical character of development of higher mental functions. In this case, in a case of the book Thinking and Speech, the unity of thinking and speech. The real unity of thinking and speech is verbal thinking, of course. And the verbal thinking is the typical higher mental function, which of course appears according to the general genetic law of cultural development. But to analyze what happens with these two components, thinking and speech, what changes this unity obtains during the process of development, is that from the point of view of Vygotsky, the word meaning, the meaning of the word, is the unit of analysis of this unity of thinking and speech. Word meaning is the living cell for verbal thinking. And the most important result of this discovery, which is presented in Thinking and Speech in this book, is that during the development, the word meaning also develops. You will find this in the book. I don't want to tell you about the content of the book because you will read it themselves. But this new type of analysis really made it possible to make a sort of discovery in psychology that there are no stable meanings of the word. In different ages, the word meaning is different. The dynamical character of the unity of thinking and speech, which is based on the change of the word, of the meaning of the word, is the kind of impact Vygotsky has been done for the understanding of the psychology of the thinking and speech problem. And it still remains quite new, and it still remains as a kind of revolutionary finding. But to understand this finding in an appropriate way, we have to have in mind that in this book reflects the real evolution or even revolution in Vygotsky's approach to the problems of higher mental functions, to the problem of development, and to the problem of the developing units, developing wholes, developing systems, developing organisms. We can formulate it so that our consciousness, human mind, is a kind of organical system, is a sort of spiritual organism which develops according to every organism, which develops that the functions are obtaining a new status, a new nexus, a new combination, and they are working according to the new laws. So, I think that we have to come to the end, little bit and gradually. And the conclusions of our lecture. Well, I was thinking how to arrange the conclusions, and then I decided, I made up my mind just to make this question open. I can formulate one conclusion, and then, after all, you can formulate your own conclusions. Because for me, the most important conclusion is that before reading this great book, which is called Thinking and Speech, which was written almost 80 years ago, we should have in mind the whole theoretical framework, which was changed during the book was written. And book reflects these changes, and these changes create the book. And there are two lines of development of Vygotsky's thought, Vygotsky's approach to understanding of development of human mind. The first line is the transition from understanding of higher mental functions and lower mental functions as separate functions to the understanding of their systemic nature, from higher mental functions to psychological systems. That was the first line. And the second line was the transition from mechanical approach, from the analysis by elements, by components, to the second, higher, deeper kind of analysis, to the analysis by units. From understanding of the psychological systems as a mechanical systems, which can be reduced to their components, to understanding of the psychological systems as organical systems, which cannot be reduced to elements, to components, which require different dialectical type of analysis. The method of analysis, which is the analysis by units, by living cells. And this book, Thinking and Speech, is interesting for us because of many, many things. But one of these things is what I mentioned. This book shows how the researcher is coming to the way of understanding of the object under study, how he changes the focus of analysis, how he conceptualizes the experimental results, how he tries to find new ways and deeper ways of understanding. So, from this perspective, Thinking and Speech is famous book, is great book, because it reflects the internal, personal, scientific laboratory of Vygotsky, the dramatical development of his own ideas. And these circumstances make this book extremely interesting, not as a academic research, but as a historical monument of search and findings of the dramatical and even tragical ways of finding new perspectives of analysis. So I think that this is one of the most important things we have to have in mind when we read this book, which is called Thinking and Speech. So, and that's what I wanted to tell you before you go to the library and take the book and read. I hope you did find a map or navigation which might help you to find an orientation in this terra incognita, in this unknown country called Thinking and Speech. And I would like to thank all of you for being here, listening this. I hope that my English, which is far from perfection, was still, well, anyway, understandable. In Finland, we have a joke that people here speak not English but Finglish. But I hope that my Finglish was more English than Finnish. And anyway, we try to use the language not as a goal, as an aim, but as a tool for understanding, as a cultural tool. And I hope my language was at least understandable. So, thank you very much for coming, for being, and I wish all the best to all of you, and see you next time. Bye. Yours, Nikolai Veresov from Finland.